All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. My name is Megan, and I am in the Programs and Exhibits Department. Welcome to or welcome back to our fifth annual, but first all digital FanCon. For this session, if you are doing Action Bound, our code is 3J PTT. It's also written on the screen. If you have no idea what Action Bound is, we are doing daily drawings. So the more things that you do, the more digital raffle tickets that you have in order to win a Funko Pop of your choice. More information is on our website at ahml.info/FanCon. So today is the day where you get to ask all of the burning questions that you've had about video game development. So feel free at any point to throw them in the chat box. We are monitoring them, so we will try and get to as many questions as we possibly can in this 90-minute session. But before we get to your questions, let's introduce our panelists. Hello, panelists. Before we get those burning questions, tell us a little bit about yourself. So what's your name, where do you work, and what do you do there?
All right, I guess I'll start. My name is Mike Zuba. I work at Jackbox Games, and I do engineering for them, as well as I'm the director of production, which kind of means I run a team of producers who are kind of like project managers who are involved in helping every different team and project get their work done.
Awesome. I'm MJ Young. I work at Level X. We make mobile video games for doctors. I'm an associate producer there. So like Mike said, I am the person who makes sure that stuff gets done when it needs to get done.
I'm Jeff Linville. I also work at Level X. I do audio there. So I make all the music and sound effects for the games that we make.
And I am Tito, Umberto Gamboa. I work also at Level X. I'm a 3D artist there. I do all the 3D stuff, material work on the medical stuff in our games.
I'm David Anderson. I'm a lead engineer at Benson Studios. I work remotely but live here in Chicago. And yeah, we do everything from mobile games to normal games to VR, AR experiences there. So.
Wow, awesome. Thanks, guys. So first question, what is it that got you into video game development? I know it's a hard one.
I guess I'll start again. Why not? Sure. All right, so I got into video game development on kind of a whim, really. I was a software engineer. I was working for an aerospace contracting firm, very fun stuff. Although we were doing a project for NASA, which was pretty neat. Anyway, it was kind of mind-numbingly boring work, and I did not like it very much. So on a whim, I sort of moved out to California and worked for a buddy to make some games on Facebook. Kind of like farming simulators, like a Farmville kind of a game. Anyway, didn't pan out, but it broke me into the industry, and I had so much fun doing it, and I haven't looked back.
Fun.
For me, getting into video games was realizing that I wanted to do too many different things at once. Going into my undergrad, I couldn't decide if I wanted to major in computer science or art, but I also really wanted to do like geography and write creative writing. And I realized that video games were a way that I could kind of do everything at once and learn everything at once. And I think that's why I ended up in production as well. But it ended up working out really well because now I work at Level X and I get to learn all sorts of, interesting medical facts all the time. And it really helps me to just constantly be learning something. And that's something that really got me into video games.
I guess I can say. I got into video. I always did audio as like a kid in high school, like recording bands and stuff like that. I didn't really know what I wanted to do with it. I actually went to school for like psychology first, and then for like a year. And then I I like played a ton of video games. The one that really got me into it was Guild Wars 2. They did like a piece, like a little sound design, like documentary about like how they do their sounds for their game. And I just was like blown away. So that like really got me into like, oh, you can actually like do sound stuff for like a living in games. It's pretty cool. So
I kind of just stumbled into it. I think I just really went to college, and then decided game dev program. I like games, and then uh, worked at this like a marketing company, and that got me connected with David Anderson and Jeff Linville, and we started working on some game dev stuff. And this was still during while I was in my game dev program in college. And by the time we did some work at this company, we made this like a cool VR project, and that made its way to my portfolio, and that's how I got the job at Level X. I got recruited at my portfolio show, and they're like, "Cool project. You want to come work over here?" I'm like, "Yes," and here I am.
Yeah, I similarly pretty much didn't know until college. I started off as an English major, and I thought I was just going to live in academia my whole life, and came to Columbia College Chicago here and started in their game design courses and moved to game programming. And yeah, I had no idea until deep into my college career.
Awesome. So we do have a couple questions from our audience. Our first one is, what is the creative process like for each of you?
At least for 3D art, in the beginning, it's a lot of just understanding what the task is. Um, it's either a collection of reference, functionality, what do we want it to do in the scene? Like, is this an aesthetic piece? Is it important? Is this something we need to interact with? Does it need to be rigged? These are sort of all like the beginning questions to later like figure out what's the roadmap for creating this asset. So if we know it's pretty, we can just go 100% on making it pretty. If it needs to be functional, we need to have more of a tech art kind of mindset with before going in. Just planning out all of those type of things.
For me, I guess for like sound and music, it's kind of a similar thing. It's like, what's like the mood of like whatever thing you're trying to make. So like, I don't know, we make games for doctors at Level X. So it's like, you know, you want like a science, like kind of sort of educational sounding thing. And then like, just kind of start from there. Usually actually for me, I'll start with like a specific like scale, like different scales in music kind of have like a different, like, I don't know, like emotional attachment to them that like you hear. So I'll start with that or something. And then like for other projects, it's just the same thing. It's just like, what is the mood you're trying to convey? And like, what do you want the player to feel? And then you just kind of start going. You just have to go. And then, yeah, that's how I start at least.
Just getting going is really important from a game design perspective as well. Something that I really learned from my graduate program in game design that was really, really helpful was that you need to start prototyping really, really early. And this is something that's especially important if you're working by yourself or with a really small group and you want to start making games. The first thing you can do is start making sure that that really cool idea that you have, the core idea of it, that core mechanic is well realized and fun. And after you got that all figured out, you can keep iterating on that and you can keep exploring it more and building outwards and following the fun from there. A big part of the creative process of making video games is just throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks, or just trying until you figure out something that works.
Oh yeah, I'll definitely reiterate that as well. At Jackbox Games, we make 5 party games every year and bundle them into a pack. And every year that means we have to create 5 unique new ideas for party games, and it's kind of a hard task, and it gets harder and harder every year because we keep using up our good ideas. But yeah, that's exactly what we do. Is we just start, in the off season after we release our last year's pack. So around December, January, we just start paper testing and prototyping games like crazy, nonstop around the office. There's just continually new brainstorms and new prototypes being thrown out and tried. And again, it's just like MJ said, you kind of just throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks, and then you start refining. But you refine by doing more and more play testing, more and more prototyping, pretty much ad nauseum. I mean, by the time we enter development on all of our games, the teams are actually really excited to work because they've just spent the last 3 or 4 months just doing nonstop prototyping, and it's nice to actually dig in and have some real work to do.
Yeah, I think engineering a lot of times is like a more individual thing, but the best way to start out, I've found, is to get together with a team of engineers and other people you work with and just put architecture on a whiteboard and work together and brainstorm just the same way everyone else is talking about. I think it's the same for engineering too.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. From Scully Boy, could you provide any insights as to the advantages or disadvantages of Unity versus Unreal versus other engines? Do certain genres work better with different engines?
So at least from an art perspective, Unity versus Unreal. Unreal is kind of already tailored and very art friendly. If you want to make something look good in a couple seconds, you can just throw it into Unreal and it's kind of already there. All the post processing is there. The settings are really nice to work with. With Unity, you need to do like a little more prep work. Now, on the engineering side, I think our engineers could speak more about this. I think Unity is a little easier to like custom tune to whatever you're trying to do, while Unreal is just it's very good at doing like first person, third person, that sort of stuff.
So if you are starting out in game dev and you don't know much about programming, you might have an easier time starting out in Unreal because Unreal has a built-in visual programming language called Blueprint. And so what that means is that you're able to arrange little nodes and connect them together. It's a lot more similar to if you've done like programming in something called Scratch, or trying to think of some other examples, but it's a programming language that's a little more friendly for people who are starting out, versus if you start out in Unity, you're going to have to learn and understand C#. And while there are a lot of really good tutorials out there and Unity makes it really easy, it might be a little harder to get going in Unity right off the bat.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with MJ. And if you do want to get your hands dirty and learn how to program, C# is a lot easier than C++, and Unity uses C#, and Unreal uses C++.
We don't actually use either of Unreal or Unity at Jackbox Games. We have our own custom engine, sort of based on Scaleform, which is an older technology that used to be used for a lot of UI. However, some of the point of the original question of, is one of the engines better for a certain type of game? No, that you can make any kind of game with either of the engines. It's more of just a matter of which engine you feel more comfortable being able to use.
Yeah, both Unity and Unreal are like just free if you want to like mess around in them. So a good like way to figure out if you're trying to make a project is like try to do a prototype in both of them, and like see what like works, what you like better for your game. Because like I've never used Unreal actually before, like when I was in school, but I know that like Unity's audio capabilities are like not super great, and we have to do like a lot of like custom audio like programming to like get some good like tools for like audio designers to use. But I've heard Unreal's is better, so it could be, it just depends on what you're making.
Thank you very much. All right, this one is directed for Jeff. What is the device with the dials and such behind you?
It's a modular synthesizer. So I guess I don't know how to explain it. I guess it's like a bunch of pieces of a synthesizer. If you think of like a synthesizer with like a keyboard, and it makes all these different sounds, like I can I can get different, they're called modules. That's why it's called modular synth. And you can just customize different functionality that you want, and then you plug them in together with these little cables. And then they make sound. It's pretty cool. It's also very expensive, so there's free versions. VCV Rack is free online if you want to. That's how I learned. But yeah, that's what it is.
Cool. I'm glad somebody asked that question because I also wanted that answer.
They look very cool.
Yeah. What are the biggest obstacles in your field?
For production, it's definitely time. But more recently, of course, with all of us working from home, it's the fact that everybody's working from home. And that makes it a lot more hard to keep people organized and keep information flowing smoothly. Production is one of those things that's a little bit nebulous and a little bit hard to pin down exactly what it is, especially if you're not familiar with the games industry. But a really good way to boil it down is making sure that everybody who needs to be talking to each other is talking to each other. And so most recently, that has been the biggest struggle, at least in the production world.
All right, well, for Jackbox games, time is definitely part of it, but it goes farther than that to just the scope of what we actually can take on every year. Because we do make 5 different party games, the development cycle of each game can range from 3 to 6 months each. So that's kind of all we have, is at most 6 months to make one of the games that goes into our pack. And so while time is the big element there, it's also figuring out a fun game we can make within the scope that can be done in that time, which is also a big challenge every year. And every year we run into issues where one of our games we've picked, the scope is ballooning out of control and we have to make large feature cuts. And it's a big challenge to fit that development into that tight 3 to 6 month cycle every year.
For me, there's a very small obstacle that's very specific, which is getting animations for myself so I can actually do sound on them, because usually that stuff just everyone forgets to. Like every sound designer I've ever met is like, they'll change it. I'll have a sound done and then they'll change an animation like way without telling anyone, and then it's like, oh my gosh, this doesn't work anymore. That's a very specific one for me, but definitely a large obstacle, I think, for people that make games, and especially for indies, is like convincing them that sound is actually an important part of the game development process. Like everybody knows that they need some music and some sound, but if you really have a good soundtrack and a good sound design in your game, it's just gonna like push it from like here to just, I don't know. I could be biased, but I feel like good sound design is like super important in your games. And I think getting a sound designer and getting them in early is like it's just been a tough challenge for me, for sure, to like convince people that. But yeah.
I believe you, Jeff.
Thanks.
For me, as a 3D artist, I think the biggest obstacles for being in 3D art is time and tools. You can never have enough time trying to do cool stuff, especially when you're trying to like make functional art or delving into the more technical art sort of stuff. So like if you want to make a sphere do cool stuff and react to sound and then like make it interact with the world, like that's really cool, but it takes time to make that like functional and make it like work. And I guess where like AAA is going, and if you want to hit the beauty mark of like the standard, that's now with all the like new tech, the new consoles coming out. Memory is a limitation, and file size is a limitation. Trying to be like aware of like how many textures you're using in your scene, how like that quickly eats up resources. Like making one really nice asset can really start taking up file size. So like that's definitely a limitation of thinking, how do we make something look good for cheap?
I think on more on like Jeff and I have been working on this personal project for a couple of years now, and I think the biggest one with that is managing scope and understanding. It's something you do all the time. You're constantly scoping down or scoping up, depending on the ideas that you have, and it can be difficult. And I'm not sure that I'm still any good at it, but it's something to worry about.
I believe in you, David. You can scope it.
Thank you. Thank you.
What language is scale form in?
So scale form is mostly written in C++. There's some wrapper code around it in whatever language we are developing for what platform we're on. For instance, if we release the game on iOS, there's some Objective-C related code that goes along with it. But the majority of all of our common engine code is all C++, which is what scale form was originally written in.
Thank you. All right, we have some advice seeking. From Xtrinity 3, they say, I'm an artist and have been an art lead, but I'm actually directing a game start to finish for the very first time with a team around me. Does anyone have any tips for being a great director or lead? And thanks.
Well, I have some experience with this. I would say a director needs to be kind of a central point of leadership on a team, but also be able to kind of have a central vision and get the team to kind of own that vision as well. And you're kind of, as a director, you're kind of the leader or the one who is in control of the vision for all different departments, even though there might be an art lead or an engineering lead who's going to do a lot of the work and has a lot of ideas on their own. As a director, your central vision should be what's driving everything forward.
All right, thank you for that. How much time, how much of that development time is being used for testing? Oh my gosh, I cannot speak today. Jackbox games always seem to run so smoothly regardless of which device and system.
Well, we do a lot of testing throughout our process, but the main QA effort can't really start until the games are pretty far along, so that they have most of the features and most of the textures and everything in. So I would say we spend the last 2 months of development doing pretty hard testing, and it continues on even after we launch. We usually do a patch with more bug fixes and things after that. But however, we are building our games on a common engine now that we've been using for about 8 years. So we've found a lot of the major issues and clean a lot of that up now. So when we do make new games, it's very easy to get them to a pretty polished state quickly. But there's always bugs. There's always things that slip through too.
Thank you. All right, we have a very timely question. With COVID, we are moving to online expos. Have you seen the Devolverland Expo game, and what do you think of it as new steps towards marketing games?
I saw that just today, and I thought it was pretty awesome. And I think they called themselves the future of marketing or something like that, because they're very funny and But I think it's an interesting way to show off all your game. I'd never seen anything like that. I thought it was a really good idea, but I could see more companies starting to do that for sure.
Yeah, it was super interesting. I really liked it. I think it's a cool way to make a meta game. It's exciting.
So with new things, I have a question for you guys. So I'm assuming that you caught the PS5 reveal. So what are your thoughts on this new console, and does that change anything for you on a developing end?
So I think the most interesting part about the PlayStation 5 reveal is that you can buy a model with and without a disk drive. And I was almost expecting there to be no disk drive on this like next one. We're really moving into the age of like everything's a digital distribution now. And so I'm interested to see how many people who pick up the console are going to opt for that little bit extra price to have the disk drive available to them, and how much of the market's going to shift completely towards digital distribution. That's the biggest thing that I see like influencing the industry from here on out. Level X mostly makes mobile games, so it's not going to impact us too much.
Who is thinking of getting it without the optical drive? Because yeah, I'm also thinking of just going full digital with it.
I'm good going full digital for sure.
I'm going full digital. Yeah.
Yeah, there's no need to own discs anymore.
Oh man, I feel really outdated then, because I think we're going to get the drive.
Unless you want to use it for Blu-ray.
There you
I
go.
guess that's cool.
Yeah, that's true.
From Audio Really, do you have any development horror stories?
I'm thinking through like which ones are I can like contain best to talk about. We had so this was back when I was actually developing games while I was working at a therapeutic games and apps lab at the University of Utah. And so something that we were making was a kind of gamified app to go into developer operating rooms. The actual surgical operating rooms to help make sure that like we weren't getting the wrong patient, the wrong surgery. It's basically a checklist to make sure that doctors were doing everything that they needed to do. And this isn't really something so much that went wrong with development, but that I just wasn't like really instructed on what to do with myself while I was in there testing this product. And that was the surgery started going wrong, and there was like all the nurses and doctors just like flocked over to this patient, and I had to sit there like in the corner clutching this tablet, like trying to figure out if I was supposed to still continue testing this thing and doing my best to do that, or just kind of stay out of the way. And so I think that really shows that like if you are testing a product, especially with like developers or in unusual circumstances, always make sure that you are explaining to your testers what their expectations are so that they can keep getting the data that they need and not get in the way.
Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, that sounds kind of awful. We have a question. As an IT manager in former game development, our agile methodology has become better with working from home as our scrums feel more straightforward and less chit chat. Do you feel the same?
I can definitely attest to that. Yeah, the meetings are much shorter and there's much less fat. And, I don't know why that is, but it's just happened since doing full remote. My company is 100% remote and probably will be for like many, many months to come. So
for my team, it's been a mix of both. Overall, the numbers are showing, like when us in production sit down and we calculate our velocity, we are showing that like we're actually being more productive than we have before. But because of the way that we've had to adapt to working from home, there's just certain disconnects that have become apparent in the way that, meetings are or aren't happening. We found that overall we have to have slightly more meetings that are more specific about certain topics, because we don't have that freedom to just walk over to somebody's desk and check in on something really quickly or overhear something in the halls. So we have to really, really make sure that we're being proactive about sharing information instead of just relying on the way that we used to when we were all at the office of just kind of passively being able to take it all in.
Yeah, I share that exact same sentiment with Jackbox games as well. We kind of have a mix of some teams are doing better with it, some teams are not, and it's kind of just depends on the personalities involved in those teams. So we've had to do a lot of experimenting with different ways to set up video conferencing. We're actually, our newest experiment is we have a full internal Jackbox Games Discord with a bunch of video chat channels. And so it's kind of almost like a virtual office simulator. So you can actually see there's rooms or channels for each game team or each department. And you can, like a water cooler channel for everybody to hang out in if they just want to chat. And you can kind of, the nice thing about using Discord in that way is you can see where everyone is and what room they're in and who they're talking with. And so it has a different unique element to it than just say hopping into a Zoom call when you need to or something like that.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So we have a follow-up from that question. So following up from the working from home, for those of you who were formerly in the office, do you think that working from home will become a permanent staple for you once the pandemic has calmed down?
Yes. I think at least seeing a bunch of other artists, some people are really like, see the appeal to working from home, especially like for being an artist. It's like, I have all my tools, I can do everything here remote. As long as people are efficient and have good communication, a lot of art can just be done remotely. Even with like my experience with Level X, um, for the most part for me, my meetings feel way more slim and precise, and I can just get that like out of the way in the morning, get like just to the point quicker, and then spend the rest of my day just working on art. And yeah.
I could definitely see myself being permanently from home, especially as like audio, or if you're like working on music, or just things you kind of need to be in like, you know, a zone for. It definitely can be frustrating being in an office, like if you're like, you know, really feeling something you're working on, and then like, you know, people like pop by or whatever. But depending on your team's culture, it definitely like, we get a lot of extra stuff done just by like seeing each other, going to each other's desks, and like just kind of like socializing in person. So I like going in, but I could definitely see myself working from home more often than I used to. Yeah.
All right, I'll go next. So for Jackbox Games, we're obviously in no rush to open things back up. We're taking it very slow, but ultimately we do want to go back to having everyone full time in the office. But we do have a very flexible work from home policy as it is already. People can already just work from home as much as they want to or need to. But the creative process that we have and the way that we do impromptu brainstorming, play testing, a lot of that stuff we do, just it works so much better when everyone is just in the office and can just kind of be there on a moment's notice to see what's going on. So we ultimately do want to get back to that, but yeah, there's no rush, and we're letting everyone kind of handle it however they want to as well too.
Thank you. So you guys are already inspiring someone. We have someone who's chatted in that they're going to look into Discord for their future projects.
Dude, it's pretty cool. I mean, we also use Slack as a tool for chat communication, and Discord pretty much has all of that functionality too. So you almost don't even need Slack, although it does some things better around like file sharing and other app integrations that we use. So I can't really fully get away from it, but Discord does quite a bit, and for free too. You don't even have to pay for it. It's really neat.
Free is always great. What are some of the funniest bugs or features that have happened in your games?
I have one. one of our projects at Level X, we were doing some stuff in Unity and Cinemachine and post processing. And so we have this whole like sequence playing out, animation, everything's fine. And then I still don't fully understand how it happened, but the last couple seconds of the sequence seems to be hitting some certain like keyed like values where the post processing would zoom in on the character's face, put a bunch of bloom, add a lot of halo, and it just made the character look totally angelic and like strobing on its face. It's one of my favorite.
My favorite that I've experienced was actually on a student project that I worked on when I was in grad school. And it was kind of a Stardew Valley type situation where you had a lot of characters running around the overworld, supposed to be doing different things. But our character manager got messed up somehow so that only one of the characters was broken. And it happened to be this little boy character who was already a little bit creepy, but his walking animation wouldn't work and his spawn times wouldn't work either. So he'd just turn up at your house, just gliding in through your door at like 1 o'clock in the morning and stand in the corner and wouldn't be available to talk to. He'd just sit there like tapping his foot and watching your character sleep. And for the longest time, we couldn't figure out what was causing this because he was the only character that this was happening with. So it's just this really creepy, long drawn out thing that we actually had to do a playtest with of like, why is this character so creepy that he's just gliding around silently?
I think in every game I've ever worked on that has any sort of like physics interaction at all, there's just almost every time I've run into it in any game and a lot of games that I play where you just like interact with an object and it just like shoots off into space, like flipping like all crazy. That's my favorite. That's the best bug. That's the only bug.
MJ, yours sounds absolutely terrifying. So we have a question for Mike. Are there any ideas that you guys have wanted to implement but simply couldn't because of various reasons?
Yeah, every year we always have ideas that we kind of kick off to the future, wish we had more time to do, or wish we could spend more time figuring it out. For instance, one that we kicked off for 3 years and eventually got around to doing was Faking It. So that game is in, I think, Party Pack 3. Anyway, that game was originally pitched and started getting prototyped back when we were starting to make the first Jackbox Party Pack. And there was such a diehard kind of group of people around the office that just loved it. And so every year they kept working on it. They would bring it out. They would try new things. They would get people to play it, for months at a time. And they just couldn't. There was one minor tweak. I think it was just the order in which information was revealed. And it took us 3 years to figure out the best way to present that information. And once we did, it kind of just clicked and became, a great game that we have a lot of. It's a fan favorite for a lot of people. And so that's the kind of thing that we do often. We brainstorm and prototype tons of games every year, and we can only make 5. So a lot of those kind of get kicked down the road, or maybe they're too big and we want to spend more time kind of refining it before we start it up. So yeah, we run into that every single year, and we continue ideas for up to, several years before they make it into a pack.
Awesome. All right, we have Adam, and Adam says, I'm 10. What should someone my age do to become a video game designer when I'm older?
That's a really important question, and something that I wish I would have known the answer to when I was 10. And my number one bit of advice, other than starting to just make games, is playing a lot of different types of games. So something that will benefit you a lot is making sure that you understand what makes certain types of games work, even types of games that you aren't super interested in. So if you look at some really, really popular games like Fortnite, it's the combination of 2 different types of games that come from 2 different genres. And so the more you understand these different types of games and these different types of genres, the more you're going to be able to mix and match to make something really, really new and exciting.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I would also say design specifically is probably one of the harder things to break in doing. I would recommend finding a different discipline that you like and kind of exploring that too, so that you also have a different kind of skill set that you can bring to the table other than just design. Because every person who works on a game, from engineers to artists to everything, a lot of those people pitch in and contribute to design too. So you can be a designer and also be an engineer or an artist. And so I think that's how a lot of designers kind of come to be. So I would recommend trying to find a discipline you're passionate about too and exploring that.
Excellent. You guys are inspiring the youth. This is great. I love it. Future developers coming in. From Gazing Forth, what games do you play in your spare time?
I play a lot of Rocket League. I think that game is a perfect game. I also play a lot of RPGs. Those are my favorite kind of games.
I like to play.
Exactly for me too.
Sorry to cut you off. Yeah, I like to play a lot of RPGs. I like to play a lot of MMOs. Love World of Warcraft. And I like a lot of indie games like Hyper Light Drifter or a game called Inside. Those are my favorite types of games, like aesthetic puzzle games, I guess.
I like my indies too. I like playing a lot of community management or city management type of games, like Factorio, City Skylines. I really like spending a lot of time in those, just sinking hours in that sort of stuff, like in the spring or the summer. I also love stuff like Raft. It's a survival game, and then stuff like Divinity Original Sin. I'm really excited for Baldur's Gate. I want that to come out now.
Yes.
It's a good studio and some good games.
I play a lot of video games that are in the realm of customization and building. So I really like City Skylines too. But I've really been into roller coaster theme park management lately, and I've been playing a lot of Parkitect, which is, if you've played the really really old Roller Coaster Tycoon 1 and 2, where it's kind of zoomed out and on a 45-degree angle isometric view, it's a lot like that, except updated for modern times.
Thank you very much. All right, so this one is for Mike. Is the Jackbox Party Pack international? And if so, do countries with restrictions cause problems? It looks like they had an instance where Germany forbids animals in their user chat as they were considered swear words.
I haven't heard that before. We do release all of our games internationally, but they are not localized. So you can buy it anywhere in the world and play it anywhere in the world, but you're getting our English text and voice recording. However, we are trying to do some localization. We actually just released Quiplash 2 International on Steam, and we're kind of experimenting with that to see how it goes. So it has a basic eFigs localization that's France, Germany, German, Italian, Spanish. So we're trying to see how that goes, because there's a market for it. We do have a lot of diehard fans in Europe. We have in the past, when we were making You Don't Know Jack a long time ago, released some localized versions of that, and they were very very highly reviewed and well regarded. So we're trying to do more localization, and we'll see how this kind of run goes, and if there's a demand for it, we'll probably keep doing more.
Excellent. That's what we like to hear. From Xtrinity 3, how do you generate interest in a project? Is there an optimal point in development to begin marketing your game?
I haven't put out a personal game, but I know from working on a lot of projects, and especially games, that your game, the worst thing you could do is start marketing it, your project, whatever you're doing, too early, because your project right now might look like a totally different product in 2 months, and you just won't even see it coming. I've like had a lot of experience with that in the past for sure.
Yeah, it's a tricky question, and it kind of depends on your game because, just like Jeff said, you don't want it to be out too early, but you also want to build and generate buzz, and you want to get people excited about it. And so there is a point. It's hard to say when that is, but there's definitely a point when you feel comfortable enough about the design and the current implementation where you will need to say, okay, let's get this in front of people and let's start, getting exposure. And that's, it's kind of something you have to determine for your own game in whatever state it's in.
Great, thank you. So this is my own question. Who is your go-to Mario Kart player?
Luigi, all the way. Good midweight, goes anywhere.
Always Wario.
Ever since I unlocked the Golden Mario, it's Golden Mario because it's gold and it's very cool.
Custom me character because I like seeing my avatar.
I don't have a favorite. I will play a different one almost every time just because, honestly.
All right, I just had to know. That's how I know people, is who they pick. So how do you avoid burnout with all of your work and stressors?
For me, I just make sure that I don't work too many hours in one day and that I take at least one full day off a week. I often work 6 days a week, a lot of hours, but as long as I have that one day to kind of, decompress and stuff like that. Yeah, and I make sure that when I'm not working on the game that I'm doing something completely different, that I'm playing a video game that has nothing to do with it, or like hanging out with my wife or my puppies, or like just getting away is very useful, I think.
A big part of my job as a producer is making sure that the team that I'm a producer for isn't experiencing burnout. And so if I'm experiencing burnout, that likely means that the rest of my team is, because we're working on a schedule that's too accelerated. And that usually means like, oh, let's take a look at our game. Let's see if we need to push the state back or cut a feature or reevaluate who's working on what, to make sure that nobody's being asked to work more than they're able to do.
I think like creatively, for me personally at least, if I'm like working on like, I don't know, a song for a game or like, something like that, and I'm just really not like feeling it, or just like really I don't know, just like having a hard time, usually that means I'm like kind of a little burnt out. So I usually just stop. I just like walk away from my computer, and if I'm not feeling creative, and then usually like the next day I'll just work even more, and I just really get into the thing. So usually just knowing that it's okay to stop when you do feel burnt out is like really important, at least for me personally, I've found.
For me, work-wise, it's having some sort of ritual, or like a full stop, especially with COVID. Like after this hour, I'm putting work away. Like I'm no longer gonna tinker it. I'm not gonna like investigate into something, because at least for me, and like being an artist, like learning one little thing, or like at the end of the day, like, ooh, I just discovered this thing, could end up like 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, and you're just like, oh, there goes my day, because like something caught my eye or something. So like just having a good ritual of like, work is done, continue it tomorrow, really helps with like burnout. Creative burnout for me is also a thing, and I like having these sort of like taste breakers for myself. Like, I've never done this style, or I've never done this program, or I've never done this technique, and just trying that out after like feeling stale. Like, I've been making I don't know, realistic environments for like too long. What happens if I make hand painted materials? What does that feel like? And that really helps, like just exercising your art brain and just feeling like you're not doing the same thing over and over, and getting inspired by also other techniques.
Awesome. Thank you very much. We have another question from Scully Boy. With the new console generation approaching, how do you think indie devs will fit in with the expectation for top of the line visuals in an era of 10-year dev times and ballooning budgets?
I think people still really love indie games. I don't think hyper realism will ever like overshadow indie games or like stylized games or just small games. I don't think um, I I don't think everyone wants to play a Last of Us every year. I think that's a sort of thing like you can handle only like so much. So I mean even like right now, I don't think indie games are doing bad or indie devs like that. I think it'll be fine.
I think that with just like with any other type of media, you're going to have your Avengers end games, and then you're going to have 10, 12, 15-minute YouTube skits that people make. Like video games don't necessarily have to fit into any specific mold. And I think as we see more and more different types of games emerging, and you have these really hyper realistic top of the line amazing pieces, you're also going to have more and more $10 or $15 like self-contained indie experiences that may not have hyper-realistic graphics, but they may have a stylistic, artistic style that is just as rewarding and just as beautiful to play and look at. They're for two completely different applications.
Yeah, I don't think that AAA studios are really competing with indie studios like that. Like AAAs are competing with each other for that space and those fans, and then indie studios are more. It's kind of different,
I think that indie devs actually now probably more than ever have like the ability to create really good visuals now. Like the tools are mostly free, so you can compete with like indie games. Like can still really have good graphics, for sure.
Thank you. So we already talked about the games that you do play. So when you play a game, are you doing it for enjoyment? Or are you still like working and thinking of all the behind the scene mechanics, sort of like how a medical doctor can't watch Grey's Anatomy or something like that?
I'll start. So for me, I play a lot of games for enjoyment, and I'm not thinking about them in terms of work. However, it does definitely occasionally spark random ideas here and there. So it's always just nice to do. But we do also play a lot of games in the office. So during our kind of bigger brainstorming periods, we will play tons of board games, tons of other party games, tons of other games out there as small groups within the studio. In which case, in those settings, we are definitely breaking them down, picking them apart, and trying to figure out what works well and what doesn't work well. How can we take advantage of what works well for them? So I kind of do both. I do a lot of it specifically for work, but also try not to do it in my personal time. But sometimes it happens anyway.
For me, I found that when I'm playing the game itself, I don't think about it too much. I usually get lost in the experience. But I'm much more aware of the way that game development works. And so I'm much more aware of when studios do something that I might have in the past perceived as like bad. I can understand that a bit more. Like the number one thing that comes to mind is if a game gets delayed, like Animal Crossing, the latest Animal Crossing got delayed for a few months. When I was a lot younger, that would have been something that upset me. Like, oh, why couldn't they have just planned ahead better? But now that I'm in production and I'm in the game world, I understand that nobody wants to delay a game. That never feels good, but it's usually the right choice if it means that you're going to have a better product at the end of the line.
I definitely dissect games when I play them, but it does not ruin it at all for me. Like it amazes me, and I get more inspired. Like I was playing Last of Us 2 like everyone else, and the water shaders in the water physics in there incredible. And I'm just sitting in the game, walking around in a circle in the water, just watching it, and it doesn't ruin it for me. I do dissect like everything I play, but it makes it better, I think. I don't know, personally.
Yeah, same. I still play games for enjoyment, but I do see myself spending more time in like photo mode, especially like in The Last of Us. I'll just be playing and like, wow, that looks really good. Zoom in. Like, how'd you do that?
There's sometimes I like will be playing a game and I can just imagine like a room of designers like designing the level and being like, oh, we want the player to go here. And I just like sometimes it can ruin it for me, but I definitely notice stuff where I can feel like they're trying to like guide me. I just imagine them like on a whiteboard just drawing it out.
Thank you. So when you move from project to project, are you essentially starting from scratch, or are there certain things that you carry over to each one?
Well, we do a lot of that every year, and we do carry over a lot of very common core concepts from game to game. Most of our games do share a lot of those kind of common core concepts. So we are able to start from a place where we're pretty comfortable with what our users are looking for and what kind of core concepts work in the past. And that helps us to really get quickly prototype, rapidly iterate on new designs to get them into where we want them.
I'd say the thing that like carries over from project to project in my experience is usually like a tool that like had to be built for a specific game. And it like took a long time to build for that thing, and then we'll use that tool in our engine the next time we make a game. So then everything just keeps getting better and better because you don't have to spend time making all those tools again.
Yeah, depending on the project, the art team definitely tries and sees what can be recycled, like be either assets, lighting models, any presets for like post processing, like these sort of stuff. Like there's real, again, depending on the project, there's no real reason to starting from scratch on some of these sort of things.
Yeah, it definitely depends on the project. I work for Scientific Games here in Chicago, and it's slot machines, and they're all, most slot machines are very, very similar. So a lot of like the new ones are built on the old ones, stuff like that.
Excellent. Thank you very much. How long, so we talked a little bit about like time management and deadlines and those kinds of things. How long does it typically take either your section of the video game part of it or for the full game?
I mean, that varies wildly on the type of game being produced. For the types of mobile games, those can take anywhere from 4 months to 6 months of active development. But as you know, a lot of console games can take years and years to develop. So it kind of harkens back to that indie game versus AAA game mentality. An indie game is likely going to take a lot less time depending on how much story or how many features are in there, versus a hyper realistic game where they go on site and research the setting and take pictures and videos and make sure that they are representing everything realistically.
All right, we have a couple questions coming in from X Trinity 3. A pattern I see in development cycles is that early dev and wrap up is exciting and hectic, but the middle can turn into a drag and people tend to lose passion or motivations. Do you have any tips for pushing through?
Yeah, so a big part of this lands on production and design to keep that vision moving forward. The best thing to do is to keep people on the team excited about what we're making and keep exploring like the big developments and big accomplishments that we've made. The best thing that I've seen so far is just making sure that you're continuing to play test through that middle part of development. So you can see, oh, that feature that we made, a couple weeks ago, players really, really like that. And that's always really rewarding to the entire team to see that like we made a really good bit of progress.
Yeah, I think for me personally, it's kind of like the same thing with the creative thing. Sometimes even if you're in that long stretch, like sometimes you just need to take a little mental break and like maybe take a day off. That can definitely help, like just get your brain ready to come back. And then also, I think like working, it's very easy to just like say, or we're saving all the polish items of the game till the end because we might not have time. But sometimes if you work on those little polish items, it kind of inspires you to just like get back into like the long stretch. If you just, I don't know, just work on those little things. That's just my personal experience.
Yeah, something I always really liked to do is just to kind of sit back and watch other people play at a focus test or an internal play test. Just being able to sit there and watch other people playing your kind of your creation or your game and see how they react to different moments. It's always kind of inspiring and definitely helps motivate you to kind of, keep pushing the design forward and keep trying new things. And so that's always something I lean on.
Thank you very much. All right, so with our dev cycle theme, what is the longest dev cycle you were on, or one that seemed to drag on forever, and what was the issue?
Don't make an RPG from scratch. That'll just never end.
One of my projects that got extended was having unfinished Unity tools or Unity, like, I don't know, whatever makes up Unity, like a Cinemachine, like that. That's a feature for making clips in Unity, and that definitely added time to one of our projects simply because either the tool had some bugs or be it like unfinished. Just trying to troubleshoot and trying to make a tool work the way you want it to can end up eating up a lot of production time.
So before we started making the Jackbox Party Pack games, we took a kind of detour and did some mobile and social app development, and we released You Don't Know Jack for Facebook and for iOS and Android. And that was a microtransaction based game, so it was free. You could play a couple episodes every day, but if you wanted to play more, you had to pay. There was incentives, all that. And so that development cycle lasted several years as we continued to try to iterate on the social mechanics of that game, the monetization mechanics of that game, so that we could continue to drive new players to it and they were engaged. And that it dragged on for a long time, and it became hard to continue to get motivated to think through new features or new elements to add to that game, because it was all based on a lot of the click through, a lot of monetization, ad based development, and I think we all kind of got pretty sick of that at the studio, and we're very glad that we finally did pivot away and back to making fun party games that everyone knows and loves.
All right, what is your favorite game soundtrack, and why is it Killer Instinct?
I've never played Killer Instinct before. I don't know. My favorite game soundtrack is the soundtrack to Hyper Light Drifter. The artist who did it is named Disaster Piece. He did a soundtrack for a game called Fez and a movie called It Follows. And I just think he's like amazing. I just think that soundtrack is like absolutely perfect. It's so good.
My favorite soundtrack, I probably have a few, but one that sticks out to me is 2016 Doom. It's just metal and it's awesome. And you're killing things the whole time and it's metal and it's great.
For me, it's StarCraft 1 soundtrack. It has a special place in my heart for me.
I particularly love the Animal Crossing series soundtracks. Something that I really, really love about them, and something that I urge you to go listen to if you've never noticed, is that the music changes based on the weather that's occurring. And so if you have your normal like 2 p.m. soundtrack, but if it's raining, you'll get a marimba, versus if it's snowing, you'll get like a jingle bell sort of sound effect. It just adds a lot of nice realism and nice environment to the world.
Yeah, I'll say BioShock Infinite, I think, is my favorite soundtrack. Some really cool tracks on that one.
So in the same vein, what is the perfect game to you, and why is it the perfect game?
It's kind of an impossible question because games are kind of dependent on your mood or what you're looking for right then and there. I mean, it changes from time to time. I play games of all different kind of genres, and I'm always just in the mood for something else.
Yeah, I totally get that. One that it's not, I mean, I don't know if there's a perfect game, but one that's very close to it is the Ocarina of Time. And that's because of the soundtrack, because of the gameplay, the puzzles, the ambiance. There's not a lot of direction, you know, and you got to kind of figure things out yourself. And it's just a masterpiece, I think. So.
Yeah, I don't think I have a perfect game, except for StarCraft 2 because it's amazing. But like one recently that I really like is Control by Remedy. That game is just it's beautiful. The scenes are amazing. The environment art is amazing. I love that type of genre of game. I love all that like weird spookiness of it. Yeah, it was a solid game.
All right, so I know some of you have worked in VR, so this is a good question for you too. How do you feel about VR, and do you think it's still a good direction to go in this industry, or is it too niche?
I have a lot of opinions about VR. I hate developing for it because it's super annoying. You have to like put the headset on and then you flip it up on your head and then you got to like type like this and then you got to put it back on and like test your thing. So developing for it is like terrible. I absolutely hated it. But I really think that like AR is probably going to be the future. You know, if they have like Google Glass, you know, something with that's like less cumbersome to wear. Could be, I just see that being more valuable as opposed to VR, but I'm not an expert on it by any means.
I too am frustrated by development in VR. It's the whole on and off testing. That whole cycle is really frustrating and not fun. Going back and forth, and just finding like weird bugs of like, oh, this thing doesn't work if you have two displays on each eye. So now you need to go back and figure out a solution for like post processing that apparently worked but now doesn't. It's frustrating trying to make something good and appealing in VR without getting people motion sick. Also, I do see AR being probably better. I think VR and AR is gonna take off once people find like the functionality niche of it, like just being a functional tool and like as an aid for someone, be it like Google Maps in front of you or like VR to like I don't know, measure out your apartment and then like put furniture around and like having that sort of virtual space. I think something there might spark a boom.
Yeah, I agree that AR is definitely the future and it will be part of our lives, like our cell phones are like part of our lives. So um, there's a lot more stuff there, but both of the technologies right now have a long ways to go. They're really young. Um, you, VR won't be like as fun as it can be without 120 frames per eye, I think. And the best augmented reality headset is the HoloLens. It's $3,000. It's this giant chunky thing. So it has a long ways to go, but I'm excited for where things can go with it, I think, especially with AR.
Thank you very much. person who sent in the question also thinks that the development for VR is terrible. If you could be on any game project, whether it's past, present, or future, and regardless of the company who's developing it, which project would you like to work on?
I would love to work on any of the Legend of Zelda games. I just love the mythology of those worlds, and particularly with some of the latest ones like Breath of the Wild, they have to study the world and do a whole bunch of world building to make something that's realistic and feels like it's actually traversable. And so, as I was talking about earlier, like something that I really love about video games is getting to research and understand history and geography and geology and all these different emphases. So something like Legend of Zelda or Skyrim or any of the Elder Scrolls games would be just amazing to work on.
I would love to work on something like Control. Really love their material work, their lighting work, the like unique environments they had, and it has like that weird trippy mood to it that like I would really love to work on something like that and make some really weird art.
I'll say Portal 2. I love puzzle games like that, platformer puzzles, things like that. I would love to be able to help design some of the puzzles that went into that game. That would be really fun.
I was actually gonna say Portal, probably the original one, just because of like what I've read about Valve's like development cycle, and just like being on the team that discovered like or figured out like how fun the Portal gun and how great of a game mechanic it is. Would have just been such a cool like thing to be a part of, and it sounds great in that game too.
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting to work on any games in the beginning of games like Mario and like when they were literally inventing video games. That would be interesting.
Have you ever worked on board games or card games in the past? And if you have, do you feel it is more rewarding to work on something physical or digital?
I haven't specifically worked on any that got developed. I mean, we do a lot of paper prototyping, paper and pencil prototyping at Jackbox, and we've also made decks of cards just to kind of play around with game ideas in the office. So we've developed some games like that, and it's interesting. But I love the digital format so much better, and I think it's better to develop and iterate on. You can rapidly change mechanics when you have a game kind of up and running. You have so much more at your disposal for using the graphical elements of the screen, of the controller. You have so many tools that you can rapidly develop and iterate on to change the game. And I think you're limited for board games and card games of what you can physically create with your hands. And so that's it can be time consuming and not as fun.
Thank you for that. Do you have any advice for reducing like eye strain or just the physical things that you have to deal with being at a computer or playing for hours on end and then sitting someplace else to do the same thing for fun?
For sure. And that is if you're playing anything that's round based or match based, like League of Legends, get up and do 20 jumping jacks or 5 push-ups between each round. Like that's the number one thing. That too, and Windows has a built-in blue light filter. If you just search nightlight in the start bar, you can reduce that blue light coming out of your screen, and that has saved my eyes for years now.
Yeah, same. And I also reduced the brightness on my monitors quite a bit because that light coming off those monitors, after you're staring at them for a while, it really causes strain on the eyes.
Yeah, I'd say definitely try to like go outside and just get like a little bit of sunshine. It just really can make you feel a lot better.
This doesn't really have to do with eyes, but I recently did this, get a really comfortable chair. It makes a huge difference. I had no idea.
Thank you, thank you. At what point of game development does a project come into your lap? Is it like towards the beginning? Are you continuously working on things, or are you more of like a finisher?
I'm definitely a finisher. Usually, like sound doesn't get integrated till like sort of the end of the project when like most of the functionality is like built, so that it doesn't really make sense to have sound on like something that you can't even play yet. Um, I prefer to get in earlier if you can. If you're in sound, definitely try to worm your way in there earlier.
For the most part, I think I get looped in pretty early for like gray boxing and just like ideation and just getting the roadmap for like what are the 3D needs for this project.
And then sort of riffing off of that, what is a typical work day for you?
So from the production side, a lot of my day is checking in on the team and making sure that everybody's doing okay and doesn't have any blockers. I start off my day by, first of all, posting a build of our current progress, a build video in our Slack. And then I also just check in on everybody and get an understanding of what they're starting their day off with, what they finished up yesterday, and whether or not they have anything blocking them in their progress today. And then I try and leave some time open so that if anybody is blocked by anything, I can help them solve that before moving on to the documentation or meetings that I have later that day.
Yeah, for me, I usually start with a cup of coffee and then I chat with MJ if anything's wrong. Um, that's like most of my day, and then just whatever I have to do that day.
Yeah, my day starts with slacking MJ. what's my status? Getting some gross medical reference, and then later in the day making the gross medical reference.
I can go next too. I'm sorry. So for me, it's kind of checking in, having that cup of coffee in the morning, and then checking in with myself. I usually keep either a notebook or I have our task tracking software, Jira. Just open it up and kind of review what I'm supposed to be doing today. What are the priorities? What do I want to try to get done today? And then I kind of like make a little checklist for myself of what I need to do, and then start tackling it when I can in between various meetings.
Yeah, I usually start similarly. I look at what I did yesterday, and I physically with a pen and paper write down, what I'm planning on doing today. And it's one of the only times I actually use a pen and paper, and I write it down. And then we have stand-ups where we do what MJ was talking about. It. Everyone goes around and talks about what they did yesterday and what they're going to do and any blockers, and then that's usually how I start my day too.
Starting your day with MJ. So for coders, what is your preferred software for coding and for debugging? Examples like Visual Studio, NetBeans, etc., etc.
Definitely Visual Studios. I don't know if I could code without it. It's super important.
Yes, Visual Studio for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I have to use other IDEs for other languages, but the majority I use is Visual Studio, and it's one of the best.
For sure. It's worth pointing out that Visual Studio, if you're just starting out and you don't have a lot of money, has Visual Studio Code, which is a lighter weight version that still has a lot of the basic debugging stuff that you'll need to get started.
A lot of people at Level X, I've never used it, but they use something called Rider, which I've heard a lot of good things about. That's just another one.
Sorry, I thought I was muted and then I wasn't, and now everything is fine. What makes Visual Studio so great for people who don't know?
Well, it's highly customizable in terms of the project settings and the workspace settings for what you're working on, and just in terms of the compiler and debugging tools for C++, there's just nothing better.
There's also a lot of integrations with like almost everything, from your version control to Unity to there's just all these integrations. It's the premier one.
Working on like PlayStation or Nintendo, they have integrations for running on those SDKs.
So we talked a little bit about how COVID and the shelter in place has changed things, but how has it changed your timelines, like whether in production, like getting things out, or I guess development, which is the same exact thing that I just said, but how has it changed like your project's timeline?
So it actually hasn't changed anything on my project's timeline. We found that we are just as productive overall as we were when we were in the office. The only thing that has changed is that because we are a medical games company, we're also working on some content to help teach doctors how to basically treat and recognize COVID. And so we've had all these like new projects kind of spring up. And so it's been an interesting production challenge to make sure that we are prioritizing things accordingly so we can still meet everything that we've agreed to without overloading any of the developers.
Yeah, I will say our timelines have not changed either, although we do recognize that it's still going to be challenging for us. We have a lot of, obviously every company does have people in various scenarios. Like for instance, people who are working from home right now with children have a much harder time staying as efficient as people that don't have that, because there's no schools are in session right now, so they have to kind of figure out ways to deal with that scenario while they're trying to get their same amount of work done. So there are definitely challenges, and we haven't noticed much of a slowdown, so we're trying to keep to the same schedule, and we'll see what happens.
Very good. So we are getting close. So I'm just going to try and shoot some really quick questions at you. So what type of game, like platforming, FPS, like what type of game do you like to play more than others and also develop more than others?
I really like to play rhythm games. Those are my hands down favorite. When it comes to development, it's really whatever I happen to be interested in, but I really like making therapeutic and medical games, which is how I ended up at Level X. So I like working on games that have that sort of thesis, that are working towards like an end goal of making somebody's life better or solving a problem.
I lean towards like any kind of game that's like online, like World of Warcraft or like any sort of MMO, something with other players running around. It just keeps it more interesting to me than like, I don't know. But I really like to develop, like in my free time, I really like making like puzzle games or anything that I can integrate like dynamic music into. So music that like will react to the players' inputs and stuff. I always try to like shove that into whatever project I'm working on.
I'm like to play RPGs of any kind, including MMOs, and I'm working on one right now too. That's one of my more enjoyable projects that I'm on.
I like playing anything that's like, again, city management, community management, or just seeing something evolve in the screen. That's just really appealing to me as a game. I love seeing tiny worlds like slowly grow and advance. Developing anything with interesting environments, anything that's a little like otherworldly or just cool use of environments.
I enjoy puzzle games as well. So we make a variety of games at Jackbox, from text input based to drawing to social deduction. So I think the ones that I've had the most fun working on and playing are social deduction and puzzle kind of games. So those are the ones that I definitely prefer.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Okay, so we only have 5 minutes left. So is there any last hurrah, anything that you need to say to either our aspiring coders or game developers, or anything that you just desperately need to get out into the world about game development?
I think I would just say to anyone that is interested, Unity and Unreal are both free, and there's like unlimited supply of like tutorials and like people trying to teach you how to make games on YouTube and online. You can do it on your own for sure. You can learn.
Seek out game dev communities. There's a bunch of Discord groups. There's a lot of really neat game dev communities that can either like give you more info or tips on how to start your own game, or at least just like reaching out to people and seeing what everyone else is doing in the scene.
On that note, just like Jeff said, start making games. Even if you start with something really simple, like just making a character run around a scene, that's still a place to start. And that's what's going to start helping you come up with ideas that are going to evolve into a really new and interesting and cool game that nobody's ever made before.
Yeah, what everyone else has said is exactly right. Make games, join communities, find other people who are interested in that too, and work together, because making games can be hard. It's hard to make one all by yourself. So you can make little games by yourself without problem once you get enough experience. But if you meet people who have the same interests and you can work with them, it'll make your games even better too.
Yeah, I don't really have much to add. I agree with all that. I would have said pretty much the same thing. It's totally true.
David waited until all of the ideas were out and he's like, yeah, same. Perfect planning. All right, well, thank you to all of our panelists for taking the time to hang out with us today. Thank you to all of our viewers and the amazing questions that they came up with. One more time, if you are doing Action Bound, the code is down at the bottom of the screen, and it is 3JPTT. For more information on that and the rest of our schedule, you can go to ahml.info/FanCon. Next up at 5:15, we have YouTuber and nostalgia critic Tamara Chambers, who will be playing Oregon Trail. And at 7 o'clock, we are closing the night and closing our FanCon with movie and TV trivia. So be sure to check those out too. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you.